My name is Adam Zori, so I'm part of the financial advisory team of Forvis Mazars in Poland, coordinating the activities of our group for Central and Eastern Europe. And today I will have the pleasure to moderate this webinar organized with Bird&Bird and entitled Energy Transition in CEE, Renewable Hydrogen and its Derivatives. So it's the third webinar of our series of common Forvis Mazars and Bird&Bird webinar specialized on energy. So we started with battery storage, then we focus on the end of life cycle of an energy project, and today, together with our speakers specialized in energy and more particularly in hydrogen, we will exchange on the topic. So we will start first with Olga Bezentseva, who is Director Risk Consulting Energy and Infrastructure at Forvis Mazars in the UK. She will present early challenges in green hydrogen project development, and then together with Daniel Arani and Grzegorz Pizon, who are partners specialized in energy at Bird&Bird, we will focus on legal aspects and regulatory developments. So I'll let you the floor, Olga, for the first part.
Adam, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us today for this session. What I will do today, first of all, I will set the scene, talking about green or renewable hydrogen, and we'll discuss early stages of green hydrogen project development. First of all, to start with, it's important to look at which role hydrogen will be playing in the future energy transition, decarbonization of different country strategies, but also which role it will be playing as energy carrier. As we know, traditionally hydrogen has been used as a chemical feedstock and also has been used in other industries such as refineries. Lately, a lot of attention has been dedicated to green, we also say low carbon hydrogen or renewable hydrogen, and I will be using these definitions interchangeably today. To start with, I would like to take you through the value chain, which is absolutely essential to understand how to build a viable business case for the renewable hydrogen project. First of all, renewable hydrogen projects is the hydrogen produced by electrolysis powered by electricity generated from renewables such as wind, solar, hydro, and other energy sources. And as a outcome of the electrolytical reaction, we have hydrogen and oxygen produced as main two outputs of this reaction. It is also important to understand when you develop business case, not only the production side, which is happening on the left-hand side of the value chain depicted on this slide, but also what is usually consumed by the final users. And before we move to the description of the rest of the value chain, I would like just to emphasize what's the current demand of hydrogen or derivatives of hydrogen. First of all, hydrogen is used in petroleum refining, about 43% production of the overall hydrogen demand. 33% used in the form of ammonia as a feedstock to manufacture fertilizers. About 17% used as a derivative in the form of methanol, and about 6% of hydrogen is used for steel production. Why all that is important is because once we identify the first stages required for the hydrogen production, it's important to understand how the output of this production will be used and how it will be supported which will significantly vary the overall end-to-end levelized cost of hydrogen from the initial stage of production to the final consumable element. Moving on to the next part of my presentation, we all understand that hydrogen is set to play a critical role in the energy transition, and based on the estimate of the International Renewable Energy Agency, hydrogen is expected to play a significant role in the energy sector, which currently is estimated at the level of nearly 2%, moving to 5.7% to 2030 and reaching 14% of the global final energy demand by 2050. However, all this process faces a lot of challenges. And first of all is because renewable hydrogen production is a capital-intensive process. Just as a rule of thumb, production of 1 million ton of renewable hydrogen approximately requires 10 gigawatt of electrolyzers, 20 gigawatt of renewable power, and 30 billion investment. That is all expensive. Nevertheless, with the right combination of policy incentives and other elements of business case for project developers, we see that there are first movers in the industry which started developing sustainable green hydrogen projects. First of all, if we look at the first level, such as business case for the government, it's important to say that there are two main reasons why hydrogen started playing a critical role in the business case development from the government level. Hydrogen is perceived as a great opportunity for decarbonization, but at the same time, hydrogen is seen as an energy vector that can transmit low-cost renewable electricity across time and space. However, just by having policy incentives is not enough to form a viable business case. Nevertheless, those incentives which are created for the industry produce that sufficient step to scale up dramatically hydrogen energy and create viable projects in the future. And there are a number of acts which we've seen overall at the various level, at the European level, for instance, REPower EU, RED III, or in the US, despite recent changes, still Inflation Reduction Act remains a viable option for development of the projects with the tax incentives. And we also have seen hydrogen business model in the UK providing subsidies through the contracts for difference. Nevertheless, just by having subsidies is not enough to incentivize developers. Some of them will be looking at the carbon reduction and also mitigating some reputational benefits. A few companies which you've seen which are moving in this direction is BP developing projects in Australia, Equinor and Scatec developing projects in Egypt, and other examples in Africa, in Mauritania, Oman, and other countries. What is also interesting to consider that there are new business models and new partnership models which are being created as a result of hydrogen project development. One of them is an example of NEOM project, which is a flagship project in Saudi Arabia. That is a project for ammonia production from green hydrogen. And what's interesting about this project is that there are different players, such as equity providers and EPC contractors, are coming together in the new capacity to develop those projects, in addition to the incentives and low finance incentives which are being provided. We've seen a few equity providers, such as Air Products, which is stepping in not only as an EPC contractor, but the equity providers, and also ECWA Power, which is a private power generation developer, who is also stepping in to support this project as an equity provider. So this new combination of EPC contractors who are becoming equity partners and other players creating new opportunities and new partnerships for mitigating of risks of these new emerging projects. And also what we also have seen in the market, there are advantages which can be taken by the first movers, and some of them which are already being taken by, for instance, CWP developing projects in Mauritania by creating a sustainable supply chain in the sector and developing new opportunities. So all that is to say that the business case need to be approached from different sides. First of all, looking at the incentives which are available at the government level, national and international level, but also looking at the potential opportunities which are different to the traditional infrastructure projects. Talking about hydrogen is important, or green hydrogen development is important to talk about an ecosystem in which it started being developed and will continue developing in the future. What I try to summarize in this slide is, first of all, how different levels such as international, national, regional, and local are absolutely essential for the development of sustainable business case. When policies are set at the international level, they create conditions for trade of hydrogen, of its deliverables, slow development of joint certification mechanisms. There are very early stages, but that's absolutely important to consider when you just start moving in the development of your business case. What are enabling mechanisms for those products to be tradable between various countries? And the same, looking at opportunities which are offered through the multilateral financial arrangements by different banks, once again bridging those gaps which exist between different countries. We already talk about different incentives developed at the national level, and other presenters today will be going into the specifics of those. But another important element which is essential for the development of the business case is considering combination of different opportunities which exist at the cluster or valley level in different regions. For some business cases, this would be a mechanism which will enable to claim additional financial incentives. But what is also absolutely critical in these particular instances, that clusters form the entire ecosystem infrastructure, which make those projects possible, not only because of the economic understanding or economic advantages gained through those projects, but also non-economic benefits, which are considered by different governments and which are incentivized also through different mechanisms, such as opportunity for creating additional jobs, developing infrastructure, which are vital for communities and residents as well. So those factors should not be dismissed when you consider your business case. And clearly working with the local governments is becoming another important factor while constructing your business case. Local authorities can help with the engagement with local stakeholders. They can create optimal partnerships at the local level, and therefore, once again, an approach which we see as a development of the entire ecosystem through this business case will likely to make your business case is more successful. And before I move on to the final part of my presentation, what I would like to mention is that supply and demand and the balance between those two still remaining critical factor for business case to become successful. There are different strategies which are developed at different country levels, and we call them push or pull strategies. Examples of those in terms of push strategies, we can see South Korea, Japan, or EU. These are incentives provided by introducing specific legal requirements for development of certain quantities of green hydrogen or its derivatives at the local level, or legal targets for importing them to the EU from outside of the European Union. And there are some mechanisms which facilitate those strategies, and some of them, the auctions mechanisms, which we've seen introduced by the EU hydrogen banks. And why those ones are important for the developers, for the investors? Because first of all, they help to reduce cost gap between renewable hydrogen and fossil hydrogen production. They also help different market players with the price discovery and formation of the market. And certainly they help to de-risk project financing for those projects. And in terms of the pull strategies, and a few examples we've seen recently, is those strategies which are created by the European, by the UK, without introduction of the specific mandatory requirements for the hydrogen production. Nevertheless, there are enabling mechanisms such as contracts for difference, which market players can consider to finance those projects. And we've seen a different type of incentives which are being offered through the pull mechanisms, such as direct CAPEX support, which can be considered by project developers. There are, for instance, premium auctions, which we also see in European Union and Denmark, and all of them create more certainty for the developers of hydrogen projects. And as final stage of my final part of my presentation, and before we move in the specific consideration and legal aspects of hydrogen projects, what is absolutely essential to consider is what are the specific risks which are relevant for hydrogen projects. Because all of us who work with different infrastructure projects, we are well aware of typical infrastructure risks, asset risks, challenges with permitting conditions, which are equally important for green hydrogen projects. However, there are a number of risks which I would like just to briefly mention, which would be critical for mitigating or creating mitigation strategies before moving on with the hydrogen projects. First one is availability of offtake agreements. We've seen not very strong sides of development of offtake agreements a few months ago. Unfortunately, all of them which we've seen were either non-binding agreements or MOUs or letters of intent. But recently, we started seeing more and more offtake agreements, which are binding agreements. And for instance, the recent example is the offtake agreement which was signed a few days ago between Total Energy and the RWE, which is absolutely positive sign of backing up development of hydrogen projects. And once again, those offtake agreements would not be possible between sort of current and stick incentives which are offered at the government or wider EU level. And the example of it is, first of all, is the incentives which is offered through the German government under the important projects of Common European Interest Program, which in some instances cover about 70% of the capital cost, and also the stick part, which is RED III quotas, which helps refineries like Total Energies to reach their green targets. There are different ways of approaching offtake agreements, and we will discuss it later on today. But offtake agreements help to mitigate critical risks of hydrogen projects, and also help to obtain cheaper investment, which is a critical contributor in the levelized cost of hydrogen. There are a couple of other risks, which is obviously equally important, such as technology and design. So far, due to the complex nature of hydrogen projects, we've seen that the construction cost is being significantly underestimated, and mainly, apart from complexity of this cost, is a lack of desire from EPC contractors to secure end-to-end projects, which obviously increases the overall cost. And hence, the relevant mitigation strategy needs to be developed depending on the type of the project. And the final risk, which I would like to mention today, is obviously supply risks. And supply risks, first of all, which relate to disruption in the availability and also prices. And mainly it's about supply of water and renewable power. We know that renewable electricity cost represents about 30% of the levelized cost of hydrogen, and hence when developing risk mitigation strategies, is essential to consider how those PPA agreements need to be aligned to the full duration of the contracts, and how in combination with different incentives they can create mitigating strategy for the overall business case for green hydrogen projects. And just to finish, I would say that challenges absolutely remain, and hydrogen is the fuel of the future, and most probably it always will be, considering the risks which we face with the existing projects. I would very much welcome your questions at the end of this webinar, but for now, I will hand over to the other presenter, to Daniel.
Thank you, Olga. Welcome everyone at today's workshop on green hydrogen and derivatives. Let me share our experiences in our outlook for Hungary. Thank you, Olga, for the nice graph with the different levels of hydrogen policies. I'll follow on your footsteps. This here is an overview of the National Hydrogen Strategy of Hungary. It was adopted in May 2021, so it's probably time for an update. But this is still what we have so far. The strategy aims to establish a hydrogen economy to support decarbonization and position Hungary high on the European hydrogen priorities list. The focus is mainly on green hydrogen from renewables, but that is probably the most difficult and most costly part, as Olga also mentioned. And Hungary is also strong in nuclear, and probably this is why there's also a thinking of how nuclear-based hydrogen production could also be implemented in Hungary. The target is for 2030 to have 240 megawatts of electrolysis capacity in Hungary, which is estimated at a 370 million euros investment. But as Olga mentioned, this might be an understatement. It will probably also depend on how the technology evolves, which could possibly drive down the costs. The long-term goal for 2050 is to have 15% hydrogen from green and blue sources, and kind of phase out fossil fuel-based production in Hungary. So the key goals for the strategy are a significant increase in the production of low carbon decentralized hydrogen. I'll show you some examples at the end of the presentation. Another important step would be to decarbonize the industrial consumption. That is probably the main priority, and this is where we have seen in the past few years actual steps being taken and projects being implemented on an industrial scale. Another important step is accelerating the transition to clean modes of transportation. So this is the aim is to diversify the fuel that is being used in transportation. I will mention another example for that in Hungary. The fourth key goal is to establish an electricity and natural gas infrastructure that supports the transition to carbon neutrality. So that fits in with the net zero policy objective of countries that Olga mentioned. And then the last one is kind of a general one to capitalize on the industrial and economic development opportunities. There have been actually some steps taken in this regard as well, and 2 hydrogen valleys have been nominated in Hungary or designated in Hungary. We haven't seen much movement in this respect, but this is supposed to become the basis for the localized hydrogen ecosystem for Western Hungary and Middle Hungary. A few words about the legal framework. There is a lot that we are lacking here. There has been some improvements made, and for example, the Natural Gas Act was amended to include provisions regarding hydrogen production injection into the system. So FGS is the TSO in Hungary, which is part of the MOL, the MOL group. But there are very slow steps being taken in this regard. The Energy and Public Utility Regulatory Authority, in Hungarian it's called MEC, is overseeing the hydrogen test framework, and it has been tasked to integrate hydrogen into the natural gas infrastructure. There has been just a few first steps and projects taken for the repurposing of infrastructure. One that was initiated around the same time as the hydrogen strategy was accepted was called Project Aquamarine, which was mainly led by FGS, the TSO I mentioned, and an MVM subsidiary, MFGT, which is the Hungarian main operator of natural gas storage infrastructure. And then as of January 2024, there was a change which now allows for 2% of hydrogen blending into the natural gas system. We will, I guess, need to see further special and detailed rules for this, but this is, we see this as a great improvement and probably also a result of the aquamarine project and other exploration or experimentation projects in the TSO system. Funding and support. There is a large sum allocated for the 6 key projects by 2030. So this is a long time to go, but nevertheless, I think the aims are quite important, and it gives you an overview of what are the main priorities for the Hungarian hydrogen infrastructure developments. The first one is green truck and green bus programs. As I mentioned, this is aiming to diversify transport fueling infrastructures. So hydrogen is entering alongside the electric charging infrastructure. Hydrogen valleys, Olga mentioned that, and I also mentioned that. So there are 2 hydrogen valleys being developed now in Hungary. There was a designation made, and these are supposed to represent regional hydrogen networks, or at least a framework for the network development. A hydrogen highway project for the production, transport, and storage. This is supposed to include pipelines, whether it's repurposed or newly built, across Hungary, and as well as probably interconnectors with neighboring countries. A blue hydrogen project is being supported to decarbonize industrial hydrogen usage. So there's probably 2 very important points here. The first one is we have just been seeing actual implementation of industrial hydrogen projects, and there was a will and there is a need to connect these, and partly these can be implemented as in a decentralized way, but these connectors need to become usable in order to make that actually happen and successful. A 5th scheme is the repurposing of infrastructure. So that would be the electricity and natural gas infrastructure developments that are needed to support hydrogen. On one end, as Olga also mentioned, there's a great deal of electricity needed for the production and electrolysis. On the other end, the natural gas transportation pipeline or repurposed pipelines will be necessary to make sure that hydrogen gets to where it's needed. And then a 6th pillar is research and development to further enhance the technologies and the Hungarian domestic know-how as how this can be effectively done. Here you see kind of a breakdown in terms of timing. We are now at the first stage. I believe we are a little bit behind schedule. As I mentioned, not every piece of the framework is quite clear yet, but there have been significant developments last year, and we are expecting more this year. In the late 2020s, there is a aim to have partial industrial decarbonization and to speed up the transition of the clean transportation, including hydrogen refueling infrastructure. And beyond 2030, there's more expectations to expand the natural gas networks and also include hydrogen in the heating and cooling applications. And one of the main thresholds that Hungary aims to achieve is to have 12% of hydrogen from blue sources and 3% from green sources in order to support the domestic sustainability goals. So let's move on to actually implemented projects. I already mentioned the aquamarine project, which was more an experiment, but these are actual projects that are now operational. There's 2 projects being co-located with solar power plants These are electrolysis plants in Kardoskút and Bükabrány. So the Kardoskút plant is a 2.5 megawatt capacity plant, and it stores the excess renewable energy as hydrogen. And then the Bükabrány hydrogen plant is also is next to a larger solar park, which aims to prevent waste of excess energy, and it also helps in the regulation of energy production. So these have been a total of 20 million euro investment with government support, which is, I think, a quite significant step forward. And the hydrogen that is being produced is stored, so they're used as a natural gas feedstock to enhance energy flexibility. You might know that in the EU and also in Hungary, the prices of the electricity during the peak periods of solar production have been very near to zero or even below zero. So this is why these projects probably have taken off and seem to be working well in the current situation. The next H2 project is related to public transportation. This is an experimental filling station in Budapest, in Illatosút. There has also been hydrogen buses launched alongside the station, which serve the public transportation in Budapest suburbs. This hydrogen filling station supports both buses and trucks, and it can do 350 bar for these applications, and then also can fill up cars at 700 bar. So this is quite up-to-date technology, and this has been a common project with Linde, Hungary. It's actually near the Linde headquarters in Budapest. The installation was opened in January 2024, and as far as I know, the hydrogen buses have been running with this fuel ever since. And then probably the newest and largest hydrogen milestone is MOL's green hydrogen production plant in Szászhalombatta. This is near or right in the middle of their petrochemicals refinery in Szászhalombatta. So what this plant is serving is the hydrogen needs of the petchem plant. This is the largest one in CEE with 10 megawatt capacity. It can produce 1,600 tons of green hydrogen annually using renewable electricity. One additional note, MOL also implemented a large solar park near Szászhalombatta. So this is where the renewable electricity comes from. So this is, I think, quite a unique example of a company putting the hydrogen investment between its two legs. So first one is domestic or in-house production of electricity from renewables, and the need for hydrogen at the refinery. So this is a very good match, and it very well fits in with both the Hungarian hydrogen strategy and MOL's strategy to include and implement renewable and sustainable technologies in their production chain. That was a 22 million euro investment, and it was implemented, as I mentioned, in line with the sustainable strategy called MOL's Shape Tomorrow. It is replacing the natural gas-based production, which is cutting the industrial emissions, which helps Hungary's renewables and emissions targets to be achieved. And apparently, having the experience and the success of this newly built hydrogen plant, we heard of future expansions planned for the Rijeka and the Bratislava refineries of the MOL Group. So so thank you for your attention. We are very hopeful that the National Hydrogen Strategy will further speed up the hydrogen implementation in Hungary. And as you could see, there are some great developments in Hungary, but it seems to be a little bit slower than originally planned. And the subsidies that may be flowing into this area might need to be supplemented. But as we see, actual industrial implementation is on its way, and there's a great future for hydrogen infrastructure as well as production facilities here in Hungary as well. And with this note, I give it over to Greg to talk about Poland and the RFNBO landscape there as well.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me today. For my part of my presentation, I would like to give you a glimpse of the model for production of green hydrogen. So still in line with the RFNBO regime, which seems to be quite cheap in implementation and in realization. Also in Poland, which is quite a hard place for similar projects requiring a very specific structure of supply of electricity from renewable sources. Was like quite recently we had several topics discussed here in practice in our firm related to modeling and structuring of electricity sourcing for production of RFNBO. And actually, we also considered how can we make it here in Poland to be produced in the most cost-efficient manner regarding, of course, this electricity supply aspects. So here's what we have found. Of course, it's, as I mentioned, I only have like 10 minutes and it's only a glimpse of it. There are many or much more specific aspects to talk about. Yeah, so gray of 50 or 50 shades of green. As you know, the case is that actually the EU RFNBO regime, so regime for production of renewable / green hydrogen, it basically means that the hydrogen is produced only utilizing renewable energy sources other than biomass. So it might be electricity from low carbon electricity from the grid, potentially, not really in Poland, what I will show you next, from directly connected or within the same installation, or from RES covered by a renewable PPA. And as you can see, in Poland, we really cannot count on the low carbon electricity from the grid as the market area, basically the whole area of the electricity system in Poland. We have like 70% still fossil fuel based electricity mix. So long way to go ahead of us to exceed this 90% of low carbon or renewable electricity in the mix. Also, when it comes to emission intensity of electricity generation, it's like nearly 10 times too high to base it only on the low carbon electricity coming on random from the grid. A direct line or the same installation, of course, it's like the case of our very specific provisions implementing the direct line, which are actually killer to many business models. Actually, at least these provisions are as good as they let us know what to avoid to actually kill the Excel file for the project. For the same installation, of course, it might make sense. But if we are trying to implement a large RFNBO project, it would be hard to base it solely on behind the meter power sources. And for renewable PPAs, it seems like one probably of the two viable options. We of course have like the oversupply of PV due to some distance rules related to wind, which are still under the works to be relaxed further. So there is not too many actually production ready or near COD wind power sources. And we also have to mind the temporal qualification criteria. As for the first few years, it would be good working on PV only, but from 2030, we will have to ensure the hourly correlation. And what might be hidden between the lines, if we look at the RED 2, I do not use the wording as RED 3 directive, as actually the RED 2 still has not been abolished but amended. And the RFNBO regulation is that where the fuel producer has directly or through intermediaries entered into at least one renewable PPAs with electricity producer in at least one installation, producing renewable electricity in amount at least equivalent to the amount of electricity that is declared fully renewable, and the declared electricity is actually produced in this installation or in these installations. So what we can see here is that the RFNBO regulation sets up a very specific, very demanding, I'd say, regime for what actually a renewable PPA for purposes of RFNBO is. Of course, we have also a definition of renewable PPA in the very directive, which is, in my view, not as vague as it might seem at first glance. It says that it's an agreement or a contract under which a natural or legal person agrees to purchase renewable electricity directly from electricity producer. We have to remember that like these definitions are autonomous concepts of EU law, which have to be defined like separately from any private law concepts and independently from the understanding we give to them under national laws. So first, the renewable PPA as such is not the same as electricity supply agreement. Maybe not really delve into the legal squabbles. Right now, you can look at the slides. But I'm heading to the conclusion that also a virtual PPA could be a thing. By virtual, I mean the contract under which you don't really have a supply of electricity. Of course, any renewable PPA, also the physical ones, will not necessarily, like in physical sense, lead to supply of specific electrons from one point of the system to another. Everything here is kind of legal fiction. Actually, what is good in here is the fact that the EU as such, as the regulation here does not really intervene or interfere into the specifics of electricity trading in different EU countries. This aspect of whether there are supplies actually carried out or whether there is only a financial settlement for electricity is in this aspect outside of interest of the EU as such. Of course, we can speak about the regime for regulation of the OTC derivatives. We can speak about the electricity directive and the regulation, but still it does not really make the sole structures of wholesale trading subject to the interest of the EU regulations. Also, the temporal correlation. Please note that in case of the first period, where we have like monthly matching of volumes, we can actually count as renewable electricity consumed or taken off from the grid by the RFNBO production plant, when we have a PPA for power source in which the electricity produced in the given month may be matched to the electricity consumed as it comes to the volume. So we have kind of a matching philosophy behind it, and not really one-to-one consumption of the very specific electrons. And this matching in the first period has to go only based on the monthly correlation criteria. Also, just to confirm, some already approved certification standards for RFNBO seem to allow also the use of VPPAs, as the standards of proof are very neutral to the really kind of a physical/virtual agreement we have in place. As you might have seen, there is also a concept of intermediaries, and as the European Commission explained, it's these intermediaries with help of whom we can enter into one or more renewable PPAs for the purpose, might be given a very different roles in the structures, also be a party to the given contract, but it's still necessary to maintain a direct relationship between power generator and the hydrogen producer. Of course, this might be done by different kinds of agreements, like sleeved, corporate PPAs, or virtuals. Roles of guarantees of origin, yeah, and it's quite a good thing actually, just because the sole unbundled guarantees would not be sufficient, of course, such. But it really works for demonstration for the connection between the electricity generated and matched with the consumption on the given installation. So actually, under these rules, the guarantees of origin fit the role which has been actually meant for it from the very beginning, not for like a offside of emissions, but rather as a standard of proof for the connection with a source, and it has to be based on the underlying PPA. Also, we have some exemptions from additionality criteria, and we can make good use of them. So for these renewable PPAs, the additionality requirement is like twofold. So first, it is that the installations producing renewable electricity has to be not older, or actually has to reach their COD not earlier than 36 months before the setting up of the RFNBO production plant. And the second is that it has to be unsubsidized. But as soon as we manage to set up an RFNBO production plant before January 1st, 2028, it will this criteria will not apply to us as long as until January 1st, 2038. So for like 10 years, which means basically that these PPAs might be also concluded with old or also already paid up installations, also subsidized ones, if only we manage to set up our installation for RFNBO production before the date. What's more, you can see that based on Article 5A of the regulation, where additional capacity is added to an existing installation, the added capacity shall be deemed to have started operation at the same time as the initial installation. And we have like 36 months to add these capacities. So if, for example, we are planning to set up an installation in some phases or milestones, we have to look at the first date for the COD of first electrolysis before January 1st, 2028. But as well, additional capacities may be added afterwards. And still, we are out of this additionality criterion. Moreover, based on Article 2.5, the start of operation provides for the specific criterion related to 30% of capex. So even if we are after the time window for 36 months after setting up of the first electrolysis, we will still be able to add some capacities later on, only if we fulfill the 30% of capex criterion set out thereof. So, and it still would be in line with the exemption from additionality criteria, notwithstanding the fact that these capacities were added very much later. So for conclusions, no need to overscale the purchases of renewable power. PPAs seem to be allowed under some conditions. No need to contract whole capacity of single rest installation. Of course, the virtual PPAs allow, for example, for like contracting some percentage, for example, of the capacities of different installations. There's a possibility to benefit from cooperation with intermediaries in different roles, sleeves or market access agents. Monthly temporal correlation makes it easier, but starting from January 1st to 30, we'll have to have at least a pick and mix specified capacities from large portfolios. And for the first electrolyzers which are kicked off by January 1st, 2028, we will be able to benefit from exemption from additionality criterion, and it's possible to make a good use for it really. So this is for the PPAs. Actually, I have seen it applied on the actual numbers, and the prices were very much lower than what we can expect from some Western countries to be shown. For direct line or same installation, what is good to be kept in mind, just not to prolong this part. Actually, in Poland, the whole business case for direct lines has been killed by the provisions, as it's like very much more expensive to use the direct line instead of some self-generation structures. But still, there is a possibility to escape this regime and the additional overheads using energy as a service or self-generation based on own investments, to which these overheads amounting in some cases even to half of additional costs is not to be countered. Additionality in relation to behind the meter does not refer to public support. So of course, when it means that the RFNBO producer may use subventions or state aid to finance battery storage or rest installations behind the meter, and still it will be in line with additionality criteria, which is quite a, let's say, good thing for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grzegorz. Thank you very much, Olga, Daniel, for those very nice presentations related to the hydrogen sector. As we are progressively actually ending this webinar, we have two questions before maybe closing this webinar. The first one relates to your presentation, Olga. Reliable offtake arrangements are essential to make a business case viable. What are the key factors to reduce the offtake risk?
Thank you, Adam. Yes, it's pretty much the opposite point of what was mentioned by graduates in terms of if we look at the supply chain, PPAs are an important enabler to produce hydrogen. And obviously, offtake agreements are absolutely essential to secure as sort of cost-effective financing as possible. And just will mention very briefly the key sort of mitigation factors to reduce the offtake risk is, first of all, to look for those off-takers which have substantial decarbonization targets, so they might be interested to commit upfront to prepare to offtake hydrogen. The second point is to look at longer-term obligations through take or pay, or maybe look for the minority investment in the production facility from those off-takers. Another element which is important but not always possible to achieve, such as looking for off-takers with the investment grade rating, which obviously preferred by the lenders, but as I said, not always possible. And try to secure also offtake through collocation of hydrogen projects in clusters or other arrangements which will not require to implement additional costs or allocate additional costs to the shipment, and obviously dispatching it through pipeline and so on will further mitigate offtake risk and obviously reduce costs. So those will be the key factors for me to consider while developing the offtake agreements.
Thank you very much, Olga, for this explanation. The next question is for Daniel, but actually, Grzegorz, you can also eventually add answer for the Polish context. Which bodies or entities are most influential in developments concerning hydrogen in Hungary?
Well, thanks for the question. I guess most influential would be, or where we would have to see more development, is policy and legislation, so detailed legislation, and that should come from the Ministry of Energy. So that's probably, or they have a main role in making this workable from a legal perspective and create a safer environment. Then I also mentioned FGS, the TSO. They are quite supportive for the hydrogen infrastructure, as well as the Energy Office, which is the regulator in Hungary, called MEC in Hungarian. So they do have a facilitator role, which they need to I think step up to in the coming years. And then on the industrial side, it would definitely be MOL and MVM, the two probably largest companies in the energy field in Hungary, who have kind of put that also on the agenda to have a sustainable hydrogen project implemented or already implemented in Hungary.
Thank you, Daniel. Grzegorz, you want to say something on Poland?
Well, actually, as it comes to Poland, what is very much, I'd say, expected right now, and what would very much contribute probably to the possibilities of production of RFNBO here in Poland would be the further relaxing of the so-called 10-inch rule right now, 70 meters rule, related to distance of wind farms from buildings. So actually, what is important here is that first, it would be good if the policy just would not very much interfere or pose any additional risks when it comes to its shape. In my view, of course, as the main regime is set out in the EU regulations, the fact is that these regulations actually copy some specific solutions which already were implemented in different jurisdictions throughout the world. And these are actually very similar. So we also can learn from that. But in Poland, as the energy security and the fuel independence is like a very vital topic, we should really consider every possible option to go and to enable probably the cheapest and the most viable production of RFNBO locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Grzegorz. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Daniel. It has been a very interesting webinar. Of course, the recording will be available on the internet during the upcoming days. Thank you all for attending our event today and looking forward for the next one. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.